So hello, everyone, and welcome to From Visible to Invisible, the comprehensive cost of meeting overload. I'm Jim Recker, VP of Sales here at Tweelin. And as I noticed, some of you are still joining at this time. We are thrilled and delighted to have you join us today for what promises to be a very insightful session. And so whether you're here to expand your knowledge or gain valuable insight, we aim to provide valuable content and foster meaningful discussion. So we hope that there will be some discussion after today's session. Throughout the webinar, we're going to encourage active participation and questions from the audience. So use the Q&A area, and we will do our best to answer those questions during this webinar. And where we can't, we will seek ways to reach out to you so to answer any questions that may come up during this session. But again, don't hesitate to use the Q&A feature. So we'll see a couple of people still coming in today, but I want to make sure that we don't go a little long. So let's embark on this journey of discovery together. I will hand things over to my esteemed colleague, Dario De Santis, and who will kick things off. Dario, over to you.
Thank you very much, Jim, and hello, everyone who have already joined and the ones who will listen to this webinar then on demand. My name is Dario De Santis, CEO and co-founder of Tweelin. Although there's a VP of sales here with me, Jim, I want to make sure the message comes across loud and clear. This webinar is not a sales pitch. It is the culmination of 3 years fully focused on figuring out the economics behind our current hybrid work practices, as well as future of work. And why am I qualified to share some wisdom with you today? Well, I have 20 years of work experience, 16 of which in product management roles focused on AI, IoT, and above all, collaboration. I spent 7 years at Cisco working on WebEx products, from intelligent devices, including the first device with WebEx Assistant in it, to leading strategic integrations. The product team, I owned a portfolio of integrations, including Salesforce, ServiceNow, and many others. In 2021, I co-founded Tweelin. With my team, we built the first and only digital serendipity solution for enterprise collaboration currently on the market. Now, in this webinar, we will distill 3 years of learning and insights on current and future collaboration workflows and technologies. We will quantify the measurable costs, and we will identify some of the most common non-measurable costs of the current way of working, as well as will identify opportunities to boost efficiencies. Now, there's a myriad of possible data points and parameters that can be measured or surveyed. However, we're going to share with you the ones that made the most sense for us during our product development journey. We will conclude by evaluating several common strategies to deal with too many meetings, and we'll share a few tips on how to pick your next collaboration AI technology. Now, let's start by setting the context. Did you know that every day 260 million hours are wasted hunting down people you need to talk to? And why does that happen? Well, because we are either in a meeting or in focus mode. And in this environment, messaging became the primary way to communicate during busy work hours. And calling got killed, sadly, with 20% or less calling success rate. Why do I even bother calling someone? So what do I do when I need to talk? I schedule yet another meeting, which means I'm wasting time now to create a constraint in my calendar in the future, procrastinating a decision I could have made today if only I knew the right moment to have a conversation with the person I need to talk to. The irony is too many meetings make it hard to communicate, and the current solution is to schedule more meetings. it's a vicious cycle. And this diagram highlights one key aspect of this cycle. Meetings and calling are strongly related and must be analyzed together. Whenever it is hard to call, I schedule a meeting. We will use this framework as a reference in a few moments. After characterizing better what happened with the pandemic, the vicious cycle got worse. Calendars got more saturated, especially in medium to large enterprises. People are working overtime due to too many meetings. So to summarize, a busy calendar triggers more meetings, which trigger overtime, which makes your work-life balance worse. And the opposite is also true. Less meetings means more opportunities to focus on the most important tasks earlier in the day and obtain a better work-life balance. And we estimated that solving this communication problem worldwide is worth 102 billion with the B dollars a year. And this is just for one-to-one interactions, and including everyone. We consider every possible caller in the world. But we really focus on analyzing enterprises with 200 plus hybrid employees today. So that is our reference company. Now let's dive into some costs for those employees. First of all, we need to differentiate between managers and individual contributor. In fact, managers communicate much more. You will see the details soon. We have defined two relevant personas for the purpose of this webinar. One is Maria. She represents any manager with at least one direct report, plus all those individual contributors with central managerial roles, such as a product, project, or program manager. Carlos, instead, is an individual contributor, and it could be for any organizational function. So for our purpose, we will consider a reference organization of 1,000 employees, of which 100 Marias and 900 Carlos. We have an average hourly salary for both Maria and Carlos, assuming they are based in the US. And we also assume how much Maria and Carlos cost to their employer with, adopting an average burden rate of 1.3, which is industry standard. Let's start analyzing the measurable costs. And we'll start with the cost of unsuccessful calling attempts. Now, according to TNS, the average number of calls made by any worker is 200 per month across various applications, mobile phones, whatever. Now, this figure is the average of a huge variance, and perhaps might not be significant for your particular organization. Certain roles are calling power users. Support representatives, for example, can do really high volumes of calls. Data suggests that those reps do anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 calls per month. Or sales representatives. They might spend a significant portion of their time on calls, but not exclusively. The number can vary depending on their target audience and their outreach approach. A ballpark figure is around 500 to 1,500 calls per month. Other workers instead have very limited calling needs. Many jobs, involved a minimum phone use. For instance, a software developer or a construction worker. They might only make very few calls per month, if any. Now, depending on who you ask, the success rate of calls go from 12% to 20%. And the time to attempt a phone call is 25 seconds. These 25 seconds are from wanting to call someone, pulling up the contact, hitting call, waiting 4 to 7 rings, but excluding voicemail. We're not including voicemail because it's used less and less, and there's a lot of spam going on in there. Now, after calculating the monthly cost of calling unsuccessfully for both Maria and Carlos, we can extend it to the rest of the organization, to the rest of 1,000 people, and we calculated a cost between $45,000 and $49,000, depending on the answer rate you want to consider, whether 12% or 20%. Now, let's move to quantifying the impact of those coordination messages that usually precede calls. This is the when can we talk once. The fact that calls are ineffective triggers messaging. And this is to try to increase the calling success rate. 61% of calls are preceded by a median 2 message exchanges, which is a total of 4 messages, 2 for each person. And each message takes on average 120 seconds. This data comes from our own research, and I can tell you that the 120 seconds include the whole process. So for the person who starts the conversation, from searching for a contact to hitting send, instead for receivers, it includes checking also their calendar to suggest possible times to talk. And there is variance here too, right? First messages are typically much more time consuming, while the last ones are faster. For example, okay, I'll talk to you at that time. Now, based on the data, we can calculate the cost of coordination messages for 1,000 users. And you might have noticed that it is a very remarkable cost, much higher than the cost of unsuccessful calls. Now, it's the turn of meeting scheduling. We know that connecting with coworkers in an impromptu fashion doesn't work. So the only option left is to schedule another meeting, fueling the vicious cycle. Back to Maria and Carlos. Maria spends almost 100 hours a month in meetings. This is, again, an average, not to complicate our model too much. There is variance here. You have middle management who dedicates 35% of their work week to meetings, which means roughly 14 to 17 and a half hours per week. Upper management, they spend more, up to 50% or 20 hours a week. Executive, 72% of their time, which is around 36 hours per week in meetings. So Maria is an average there. Carlos, well, Carlos, only 26 hours a month. Lucky Carlos. Now, how long do those meetings last? On average, 45.5 minutes, according to Condeco, while one-to-one usually lasts 30 minutes. We know how many hours our two heroes spend in meetings. We know how long these meetings last, so we're able to calculate the number of meetings they attend. Maria, 130, Carlos, 34. Now, let's characterize these meetings a little more. In enterprises, about 1/8 of the meetings are external, while the vast majority are internal meetings. Internal coordination cost. Now, let's look at the number of participants. We ran our own research and unveiled that 37% of the meetings in medium to large enterprises are one-to-one. How hard it is to talk to your colleagues? Mind-blowing. Now, keep in mind this number because it will be helpful later. Now, things are getting interesting when we approaching the quantification of that cost. Microsoft says that scheduling any meeting takes from 6 to 29 minutes For our calculation, we are considering an average of 17 and a half minutes. And we assume that for both Maria and Carlos, who scheduled half of their one-to-one meetings. Of course, there are two people, one of two must be the scheduler. There is no specific data on how long it takes to schedule a one-to-one meeting versus a multi-party meeting. Therefore, we're just considering the average time to schedule for all type of meetings. So that's 17 and a half minutes. Now, for meetings with 3 or more attendees, instead, the only data available to us on the average number of attendees is strongly biased by very large meeting. And it is, according to Zipia, 17.7 attendees. We will use this data anyway as is. However, we should keep in mind that about 73% of all meetings have from 2 to 4 people involved. But we'll take 17.7 to be conservative. Now, an interesting part, we assume that both Maria and Carlos schedule half of their one-to-ones. It could not be otherwise, while they only schedule a small fraction of the larger meetings because there are more attendees. This means that most of their effort is related to scheduling one-to-ones. Now, and how much does this effort cost to the organization? It's an aggregated $127,000 a month for our reference organization. But this cost of $127,000 is only related to the first scheduling. How about rescheduling and cancellation? Okay, let's be clear up front here. I think this data is a bit controversial. While the 24.4 minutes per week makes sense for canceling and rescheduling meetings, the 71 minutes of time lost due to changes of plans does not fully convince me. Now, Reclaim AI, though, is a reputable player in the space, and they quantified a sort of opportunity cost. Meetings get canceled and get rescheduled. So a sometimes sudden change of plan causes me to waste time. The cost intuitively makes sense. However, a breakdown of what is included in that cost is not available. So take it with a grain of salt and trust Reclaim AI if you want, or do not consider it. All in all, cancellation and reschedulings have a huge impact on productivity. We know that. We feel it every day. But if you want to be conservative, could just consider the more measurable component of that cost, meaning the $56,000. We have been estimating all the costs that matter based on our experience. Now we can sum them all up. And the total cost of today's collaboration paradigm in a post-pandemic world sums up to $720,000 a month, or $8.7 million a year for a 1,000-employee reference company. Now, whenever you have seen a cost range in the previous slides, in the previous calculation, we have taken the average of that range for the final calculation. Now, that's quite a bit of money. This means there is definitely an opportunity to make things better and have significant impact. However, that number is not the full story. There are more phenomena which are very difficult to quantify. There will be subjects for further research for my company and probably many other companies out there. Let's see some of these hidden costs. One is the presence curse. You need to talk to someone, so you're endlessly keeping an eye on their instant messaging presence, waiting for the light to turn green. Did it happen to you? Now, while you're doing that, you try to focus on your tasks, but you're constantly distracted by checking your colleague's presence. And the more it's urgent, the worse your ability to focus. Then suddenly, the light turns green. You hit the call button, no answer. But now the presence gets updated and shows away. And the issue is that oftentimes the presence is reflected with a delay. And by the time you see green, the other person went for a break. And now you're back to monitoring their presence. Now, similar situations are common nowadays, but it's very hard to quantify their economic impact reliably. Then there's callback anxiety, similar to the previous scenario. Now you text back and forth with the other person who told you, I'll call you in a few minutes. Now you live in fear to miss that call back, and always keep an eye on your phone. And the more it's urgent, the worse your focus. Then we have procrastinated decisions. The harder to talk to people, the slower the needle moves. We're talking about projects here, project deadlines, deals, ability to close the deals earlier or later. Example, a salesperson needs to get a hold of a product manager to make sure a certain capability can be committed for a customer and included in the response of an RFQ. Now, the only problem is that the product manager you're looking for is unreachable because he has more than 100 unread instant messaging channel. The calendar looks packed solid a week from now, and calling doesn't work. Now, similar situation is when people need to make decisions along the critical path of an important project and they can't communicate fast. These situations are very common in large enterprises and very harmful for your business. How harmful? Difficult to quantify, and very dependent on your specific business characteristics. And then you have expediting. The slower the needle moves, the more you need program and project managers expediting the activities and negotiating earlier slots with the subject matter experts and the decision makers along the critical path of your projects. So you're paying a cost to stay on time. How much? Hard to generalize. You have to consider both the impact of a delay in your project or program, along with the cost of project or program management. And, it's really hard to say this project would end early, would have ended earlier with the program manager managing it versus, it would have been late anyway, or, it's really hard to define those scenarios. Follow-ups. While some of the cost of follow-ups is included in the hard measurable factors that was seen earlier, namely the meeting scheduling cost, some aspects of it are harder to quantify. For example, refreshing your mind on where we are before the meeting. That requires time, comes with an opportunity cost. I could have done something else. If the discussion were completed in the previous meeting. Now there's another meeting about the same topic that is about to happen. And I need to get up to speed with that again. So follow-ups come with a cost, which is not easy to quantify, and are caused by fixed slot and busy calendars that do not allow meetings to run over if needed. So there's a certain correlation between follow-ups and too many scheduled meetings. And then there's fatigue. This is no news, right? Too many meetings generate the highly documented meeting fatigue. People may feel disengaged, frustrated by difficulties in carrying out all the activities that matter. Hence, they work overtime and even burn out. This is measured qualitatively by many companies, but it's hard to assign a monetary hard value to it. What impact it has on your top and or bottom line. Now, so what can we do to cope with too many meetings? Let's look at some possible strategies and their pros and cons. Be ruthless. Now, schedule and accept only meetings that require real-time collaboration, brainstorming, or decision-making. You ask yourself if information sharing and updates can be done asynchronously through email or a messaging app, a project management tool that gets updated. If yes, don't schedule. Now, this strategy gives you less meetings for sure, but it's more effective for smaller companies. The formal updates in larger companies may require a lot of effort. For example, keeping Jira up to date. What a nightmare. Or writing a long formal email with all the bosses. It could take up an hour easily. Minimize attendees. You just invite the people who are essential to the discussion and to the decision-making process. Because a large group can make discussions unwieldy and eat up a lot of time. However, when you minimize the attendees, you're fostering an information asymmetry. And more people risk not to be on the same page at that point, especially in larger companies with many instant messaging channels and email volumes, very high messages and email volumes. Now, or you can communicate clearly beforehand. You can ensure that everyone arrives at the meeting prepared, and you can do that by sending out a clear agenda with objectives and any pre-reading materials that are needed. Now, this keeps everyone focused and reduces the need for follow-up meetings for clarification. However, consuming pre-reading materials is also time-consuming. And due to too many meetings, people tend not to consume that material unless it's really important. And this frustrates who puts in the time and effort to create that content and is highly invested in the meeting that is about to happen, whereas the other person does not invest the same amount of time and effort and it can be perceived as disrespectful. And this, the larger the company, the worse. Or you can decide to embrace more instant messaging. Now, this is an approach very popular today, and it works really well for smaller, less formal organizations. However, it fails for larger companies, especially for key people. Let me give you an example. In my last 3 years at Cisco as a product leader, at any given time, I had 99 plus unread messaging spaces. I say 99 plus because there wasn't a number higher than that in the UI. Now, people needed me, but processing the constant flow of messages would have been a full-time job. So I had to disregard many of those messages. But the result was, despite my calendar was jam-packed, I saw frequent random internal meetings popping up in my calendar. And many of them were important because they were related to sales activities. And almost always conflicting with other events on my calendar. So what do? Should I be selfish and push back, or be a team player and make sure the organization is successful? Of course, the latter. I'm paid for that. But the frustration was high. Now, another strategy is promoting focus time blocks. This increases the likelihood that others won't schedule meetings in that particular slot. However, many times the focus time does not translate into actual focus. Example, you are tired, you're dealing with the firefight of the day. You finally have a moment to catch up on notifications, and suddenly you realize that you wasted a ton of time eating into your focus block, and etc. There are more scenarios like that. No meeting days. You pick a day every week or every 2 weeks and call it no meeting day. It works for certain roles very well. For example, software engineers or designers. For others, it really doesn't. And when companies realize it, they start loosening the rule. External meetings with customers are now allowed, or video calling is allowed. So it's not a meeting, but video calling is fine. And then when busy people finally have some free slots on that day, who needs to get a hold of them? Make sure to grab those free slots almost always. And then we have calendaring AI. Now, getting a calendar assistant surely automates some of the workflows. So there's a lot of gains you can have. But we believe those tools have their limits, and they're not very effective for the following reason. Imagine your workday of 8 hours is divided into slots of 30 minutes. You have 16 of them. Now you fill them up, there's a limit to what you can achieve. As a matter of fact, your calendar is like an asymptote to your productivity. It's a productivity roof. Plus, the higher your role, the busier it gets, and the more conflicts and follow-up you will need to handle. Now, if you try to apply a calendar assistant to a double, triple booked calendar in a large enterprise, you will not achieve much. If anything, it will spread conflicts over free slots, making your calendar even more busy and your day more scripted, which will push you to work overtime on the tasks that matter for your job. But that's good news, right? We believe that new AI-based technologies will eradicate this meeting nonsense, driving a deep change in the paradigm we are suffering from today. And it couldn't be otherwise, because the way we work today is too inefficient. So you as a leader, how can you identify an AI that does that? Well, we suggest you to ask yourself a couple of simple questions next time you look at a collaboration solutions that is AI powered. Question number one, does this technology add, remove, manage events on your calendar? Well, if the answer is yes, we think it's bad. We need to rely less and less on calendar, especially for internal communications. That way, we will save money and will expedite revenue generating projects that will not be constrained by impossibility of communication. Question number two, does this technology foster real-time communication at a lower coordination cost without calendaring involvement? If the answer is yes, we think it's good. Now, I promise this webinar will not be a sales pitch, and I will stay true to my promise. However, many of you might be wondering how today's content relates to our company's offering and what we're doing. So we'll just give you a hint, a little hint on what we offer, and that's it. Then a few references for you to learn more if you want. Now, in full harmony with today's message, we built the world's first and only digital serendipity assistant for enterprise collaboration. We leverage our own AI to transform one-to-one meetings, one of the largest cost components, as you've seen earlier, into impromptu conversations that work. Our enterprise customers are currently experiencing a conversation success rate of 88%, which is higher than 20% or less of any regular impromptu call. We allow users to make wishes to talk to other users. Then we look at all their devices' telemetry and calendar availability to figure out the right moment and the right channel for a conversation to happen. And we pick the channel based on the capabilities of their active devices. As a result of our 3-year journey, we believe that the future is made of fluid conversations that happen around the priority of the day, as opposed to today's scripted days that clash with those priorities of the day. Now, if you like this content and you enjoyed that, I invite you to follow Tweelin on LinkedIn, where you will be notified of new upcoming webinars. And I'm extremely grateful for your precious time and attention. And I'm always available via email should you need anything from me, should you need help to build your own business case, and or have more questions about how to quantify certain phenomena that you're seeing into your organization related to collaboration. We are absolutely eager to learn more from you all, because it allows us to build a better product ultimately, and serve our customers better. Now, I hand you over to Jim to see if we have any questions from the audience. Thank you.
Well, we actually do have a couple of questions that came in really late, and thank you for a wonderful presentation, Dario. These are very pertinent questions. The first question, well, there's actually two questions kind of in a row. Are there different stats for different verticals? And the other one kind of aligned to that was, do we see the same meeting overload with return to office? The cost similar to hybrid organizations?
Yes. So the answer is yes to both. Let's start with the specific vertical. There are some reports on specific verticals. Not very many, to be honest, because we know that collaboration is very horizontal as a discipline, if you want. So there are some vertical specific reports that I've seen in the past. Now, I can't name you one specifically, but I've seen them. Especially, you see a lot of them for sales. Many of them are related to sales. Many of them are related to, other verticals like financial services. They are very communication intensive. Some of them also have something to do with outreach, and kind of blend with statistics related to contact center or sales outreach. But I couldn't name one. We can follow up if you guys need anything. You can always send me a note, and I can do some work for you and find some of those. Then the second part of the question is around return to work, return to office. Now, the return to office doesn't change things very much, right? Because as long as you have people distributed, you will have the same virtual meeting problems. You may have, but before the pandemic, well, during the pandemic, you had almost everyone working from home. Now you have 50%, if you're lucky, working at the office. Well, actually less, because 50% it was before the pandemic. So let's say 30% of people at the office and the rest is remote. The chances you're going to default to a virtual meeting when you want to talk to someone is very high anyway. And looking at the reports from virtual meeting platforms such as Zoom, WebEx, and others, Microsoft Teams, there isn't any big, there isn't a reduction of the overall amount of meetings that people are having, despite the return to office mandate, which, by the way, doesn't really work because there's not enough return on commute. There's not enough critical mass at the office. So people go back to the office and to do virtual meetings. If you're interested in that, we're going to have a webinar sooner or later on that topic because we figured out a way to bring people back to the office through AI.
And I suspect a future webinar will also cover this topic is there data on group meetings beyond the one-on-one meetings?
There is, yeah, there is. The reason why we're focused on one-on-one is because there are a lot of them that are scheduled by individual professionals who need to communicate, and those could be avoided. So it's a clear opportunity to avoid a lot of coordination cost. But yes, there are plenty of statistics on larger meetings, and there are plenty of breakdowns on how many meetings you have per cohort of worker. And there is both, a breakdown based by roles, and there is also a breakdown in number of participants and different statistics depending on which cohorts you are considering, and also across verticals a little bit. So there is a lot of information.
Perfect. Well, I think we answered all the questions here today. I don't see anything. Yeah, there's nothing else here today. So I guess we should thank you all for joining with us. We shared a lot of data. You, of course, can reach out to us or visit us on our website at tweelin.com. Thanks, Dario, for a very illuminating presentation.
Well, thank you very much. It has been a phenomenal pleasure. Feel free to reach out.
Thank you all for joining.
Bye.